The stagecoach hit a rut in the dried earth so hard that Catherine Morgan felt her bones rattle before the world went sideways. Wood splintering like matchsticks as the horses screamed, and the desert floor rushed up to meet her with merciless speed. She woke 3 days later in a cramped room above the general store in Dusty Springs, Arizona Territory, to the grim face of Dr. Elias Thornton telling her that her right leg was shattered in 4 places and her left ankle crushed beyond repair, and that if she ever walked again, it would be with a severe limp and constant pain for the rest of her days. Catherine was 22 years old, and she had been traveling west to meet her fiancé, a banker's son in San Francisco who had promised her a life of comfort and respectability. Now, as she lay in that narrow bed with her legs wrapped in splints and bandages, feeling the morphine fog lifting to reveal waves of agony, she wondered if Thomas would even want her anymore. A crippled bride was not what he had bargained for. "I am sorry, Miss Morgan," Dr. Thornton said, his spectacles sliding down his nose as he packed his medical bag. "I have done everything within my power. The bones were badly broken. Even if they heal, the damage to the tendons and muscles is severe. You must prepare yourself for a very different life than the one you imagined." Catherine turned her face toward the wall, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Through the thin window, she could hear the sounds of Dusty Springs going about its business. Horses neighing, men shouting, the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Life continuing while hers had come to a sudden, brutal stop. The door opened again an hour later, and Catherine expected the landlady, Mrs. Henshaw, with more of the bitter tea she insisted would help with healing. Instead, a man stepped into the room, hat in his hands, his boots leaving small clouds of dust on the wooden floor. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green, like sage after a rare desert rain. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice rough but not unkind. "My name is James Bridger. I was the one who pulled you from the wreckage." Catherine stared at him, trying to reconcile this stranger with the fragmented memories she had of strong arms lifting her, a voice telling her to hold on, that she was going to be all right. She had thought it was a dream born of delirium. "The driver?" she asked, her throat dry. "Dead before I reached him," James said bluntly. "Broken neck. You are lucky to be alive." "Lucky," Catherine repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She gestured weakly at her ruined legs. "Yes, I feel tremendously fortunate." James pulled up the room's only chair and sat down, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He was probably close to her age, maybe a year or two older, with the kind of face that had seen hard weather and harder times. There was a scar along his jaw, pale against his tanned skin. "I know what the doctor told you," he said. "I was outside the door when he said it, but I have seen men told they would never ride again be back in the saddle within a year. I have seen things doctors swear are impossible happen anyway." "Are you a doctor?" Catherine asked, hearing the bitterness in her own voice. "No, ma'am, I am a cowboy. I work at the Double R Ranch about 10 miles west of here, but I know something about not giving up." Catherine closed her eyes. "I appreciate you saving my life, Mr. Bridger, truly. But I do not think you understand what this means. I cannot walk. I have no family here, no money beyond what was in my traveling case, which I assume is lost or stolen. I was supposed to be married in 2 months. Now I am a burden, a cripple, and I—" "Stop," James said, and the firmness in his voice made her eyes snap open. "First thing you need to do is stop calling yourself that word. You are hurt, you are healing, that is all. The doctor said, I heard what the doctor said, and maybe he is right. Maybe you will limp for the rest of your life, but that does not make you less of a person, and it does not mean you cannot have a life worth living." Catherine wanted to argue with him, to tell him he was naive and foolish, but there was something in his eyes that stopped her. A certainty, maybe, or a stubborn refusal to accept defeat. It reminded her of her father, who had built a successful mercantile business from nothing, who had told her that the only real failure was not trying. Her father was dead now, killed by pneumonia 3 winters ago. Her mother had followed him 6 months later, her heart giving out from grief. Catherine had been alone in the world except for a few distant cousins, which was why Thomas's proposal had seemed like such a blessing. Security, a future, a place to belong. "I do not have anywhere to go," she said quietly, "even if I could walk." James set his hat on his knee, turning it slowly in his hands. "Mrs. Henshaw says you cannot stay here indefinitely. She needs the room and you cannot pay." "I know." Catherine felt panic rising in her chest. "I have written to my fiancé. Perhaps he will send money or come himself." Or, she trailed off, not wanting to voice her fear that Thomas would do none of those things. That his letters, always so full of affection and plans for their future, would stop coming once he learned what had happened. "I have a proposition," James said. "My ranch, the Double R, it belongs to Richard and Ruth Donovan. They are good people. Ruth has been poorly lately and she could use help around the house. Cooking, mending, keeping things organized, nothing that requires you to be on your feet all day. And they have a spare room in the main house. I talked to them this morning. They are willing to take you on." Catherine stared at him. "Why would you do this? You do not even know me." "Because I know what it is like to have nowhere to go," James said simply. "And because everyone deserves a chance." She wanted to refuse out of pride, out of the ingrained notion that accepting charity was shameful. But pride would not keep her from being thrown out onto the street, unable to walk, with no resources and no options. "Sometimes survival mattered more than dignity. I accept," she said. "Thank you, Mr. Bridger," James, he corrected. "And you are welcome, Miss Morgan, Catherine," he smiled then, and it transformed his serious face into something almost boyish. "Catherine, pretty name. Now the doctor says you need at least 2 more weeks before you should even try to move. But when you are ready, I will come get you, and I will take you to the ranch." "How?" Catherine asked. "I cannot sit a horse. I cannot even sit up without feeling faint." "Then I will carry you," James said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "However far you need to go, for however long it takes. I will carry you until you can walk again, and if that day never comes, then I will keep on carrying you. That is my promise." Catherine felt tears stinging her eyes again, but this time they were not born entirely of despair. This stranger, this cowboy who owed her nothing, was offering her something she had thought lost forever: hope. "I will walk again," she said, and she was surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "I do not care what the doctor says. I will prove him wrong." James's smile widened. "That is the spirit. Now you rest. Get your strength back. I will check on you in a few days." He stood, placed his hat back on his head, and tipped it to her in a gesture that was purely Western and somehow comforting in its familiarity. Then he was gone, his boots echoing down the stairs, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts and a strange, fragile feeling that might have been the beginning of courage. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of pain and frustrated immobility. Dr. Thornton came every other day to check her progress, always with the same grave expression, the same dire pronouncements. Mrs. Henshaw brought meals and helped Catherine with the humiliating necessities of being bedridden. And James came every evening after his work at the ranch, sometimes bringing wildflowers he had picked on the ride into town, sometimes just sitting quietly and telling her about his day. Catherine learned that James was originally from Missouri, that he had come west 5 years ago after his parents died of cholera, that he had worked as a ranch hand, a trail guide, and briefly as a deputy sheriff before settling at the Double R Ranch. He spoke little of his past, but when he did, there was a sadness in his eyes that Catherine recognized because she carried the same weight of loss. She told him about her parents, about growing up in a small town in Ohio where her father's store had been the center of community life. About how she had loved reading adventure novels and imagining distant places, never quite fitting into the mold of what a proper young lady should be. About Thomas, and how his letters had painted a picture of California as a kind of paradise. "You love him?" James asked one evening, and Catherine was startled by the directness of the question. "I thought I did," she admitted. "Or perhaps I loved the idea of being loved, of having a place in the world. Does that make me foolish?" "No," James said. "It makes you human. We all want to belong somewhere." 3 days before Catherine was scheduled to leave for the ranch, a letter arrived from San Francisco. Her hands shook as she opened it, but she knew before she read the first line what it would say. Thomas's words were apologetic but firm. He was sorry for her accident. He hoped she would recover. But given her condition and the uncertainty of her future, he felt it was best if they ended their engagement. He wished her well and was returning the small sum of money she had sent ahead for safekeeping, which he trusted would help with her expenses. Catherine read the letter 3 times, waiting to feel heartbroken, but all she felt was a strange sense of relief. Thomas had never really known her. He had loved the idea of a wife who would grace his home and bear his children and never challenge him or expect too much. The woman she was now, broken and uncertain but somehow stronger than she had been before the accident, would have disappointed him eventually. She burned the letter in the room's small stove and watched the paper curl into ash. When James came that evening, she told him simply that her engagement was over. "I am sorry," he said, and she could tell he meant it. "I am not," Catherine replied. "Not anymore. I think perhaps the stagecoach crash saved me from a different kind of prison." James studied her for a long moment. "You are braver than you think, Catherine Morgan, or more foolish," she said with a slight smile. "I suppose time will tell which." On the appointed day, James arrived with a wagon he had borrowed from the ranch. The bed was filled with hay and blankets to make it as comfortable as possible. Mrs. Henshaw helped Catherine dress in one of her remaining intact outfits, a simple brown traveling dress that had seen better days. Then James came upstairs, and without ceremony or hesitation, he scooped Catherine into his arms. She gasped, instinctively clutching at his shoulders. "I am too heavy." "You will hurt yourself." "You are not," James said. "And I will not. Now stop fussing and let me do this." He carried her down the narrow stairs with careful, measured steps, and Catherine was acutely aware of the strength in his arms, the steady beat of his heart against her side. She had never been carried by a man before, not like this, and it felt simultaneously humiliating and oddly intimate. The streets of Dusty Springs were busy with mid-morning activity, and Catherine saw people stop to stare as James carried her to the wagon. She felt her face burning with embarrassment, but James seemed utterly unconcerned with the attention. He settled her gently into the wagon bed, arranged the blankets around her, and made sure her splinted legs were supported. "Comfortable?" he asked. "As much as I can be," Catherine said. "Thank you, James." He nodded and climbed up onto the driver's seat. With a click of his tongue and a gentle snap of the reins, the wagon lurched into motion. Catherine lay back against the hay, watching the sky slide past overhead, vast and blue and unmarked by clouds. The sun was warm on her face, and despite everything, despite the pain and uncertainty, she felt something that might have been peace. The journey to the Double R Ranch took most of the day, with James stopping frequently to make sure Catherine was managing. The landscape around them was harsh but beautiful, all red rock and scrub brush, with distant mountains rising like ancient sentinels. Catherine had never seen anything like it. Ohio had been green and gentle, full of trees and rivers. This land was unforgiving, demanding, the kind of place that broke weak things. She would have to be strong here. Strong in ways she had never needed to be before. They arrived at the ranch as the sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The main house was a low, sprawling adobe structure with a covered porch and windows that glowed with lamplight. There were several outbuildings, a barn, corrals where horses moved in the gathering dusk. It was not grand, but it was solid and real, and Catherine felt an unexpected stirring of something like hope. A woman emerged from the house as James brought the wagon to a stop. She was in her 40s, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a bun and a face that was worn but kind. Behind her came a man who was clearly her husband, barrel-chested and bearded with shrewd blue eyes. "This is Catherine Morgan," James said, jumping down from the driver's seat. "Catherine, this is Ruth and Richard Donovan." "Welcome to the Double R," Ruth said, coming closer to the wagon. Her eyes were warm as she looked at Catherine. "James has told us about your situation. We are glad to have you here." "I will work hard," Catherine said quickly. "I know I cannot do much right now, but I promise I will earn my keep." "Hush," Ruth said, not unkindly. "First, we get you settled. Then we worry about work. Richard, help James get her inside." Between the two men, they managed to lift Catherine from the wagon and carry her into the house. The interior was simple but cozy, with handmade furniture and colorful woven rugs on the floor. They took her to a small room off the kitchen, clearly meant for a hired hand or family member. It had a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out toward the mountains. "This was our son's room," Ruth said softly as they settled Catherine onto the bed. "He died 4 years ago, fever. We have not had the heart to change it, but I think he would have liked you using it." "I am honored," Catherine said, meaning it, "and I am so sorry for your loss." Ruth's eyes glistened, but she smiled. "Thank you, dear, now you must be exhausted. I will bring you some supper, and then you should rest. Tomorrow, we will start figuring out how to get you back on your feet." Over the following weeks, Catherine began to understand the rhythms of ranch life. She woke to the sound of roosters and the low murmur of men heading out to tend the cattle. Ruth brought her breakfast in bed at first, but Catherine quickly insisted on at least sitting up at the table in the kitchen, even though the effort of being moved left her dizzy and nauseous. True to his word, James carried her. Every morning, he would come to her room before heading out to work, lift her carefully in his arms, and bring her to the kitchen. Every evening, he carried her back. He did it without complaint, without making her feel like a burden, and gradually Catherine stopped feeling quite so humiliated by her dependence on him. Ruth put her to work on tasks she could do sitting down: mending clothes, polishing silverware, snapping beans, rolling dough. Catherine's hands, soft from years of genteel living, grew calloused and capable. She learned to knead bread until it was smooth and elastic, to darn socks so the repair was nearly invisible, to make pies that earned Richard's enthusiastic approval. "You have a gift for this," Ruth said one afternoon as they worked together on a quilt. "Where did you learn to sew so neatly?" "My mother," Catherine said, carefully stitching 2 pieces of fabric together. "She said that a woman should always be able to create beauty with her hands, no matter her circumstances." "A wise woman," Ruth said. "I wish I could have met her." "I wish you could have too," Catherine said softly. "I think you would have liked each other." She found herself growing fond of Ruth and Richard, who treated her not as a charity case but as a valued member of their household. Ruth's illness, Catherine learned, was a weak heart that left her easily tired and breathless. Having Catherine there to help with the daily tasks was genuinely useful, which made Catherine feel less like she was merely accepting handouts. But it was James who occupied more and more of her thoughts. James, who came faithfully every day to carry her where she needed to go. James, who sat with her in the evenings after supper, teaching her to play checkers or reading aloud from the ranch's small collection of books. James, whose rare smiles made something warm unfurl in her chest. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, just the natural affection one felt for someone who had shown such kindness. But she knew she was lying to herself. She was falling in love with him, and that terrified her because she had nothing to offer. She was a crippled woman with no prospects, dependent on his charity and the charity of his employers. What could she possibly give him in return? 6 weeks after the accident, Dr. Thornton made the journey to the ranch to check on Catherine's progress. He examined her legs with the same pessimistic frown he had worn in Dusty Springs, prodding at the healing bones and asking about pain levels. "The bones have knit," he finally said. "Not perfectly, but adequately. However, I maintain what I told you before, Miss Morgan. You may be able to stand, perhaps even take a few steps with assistance, but normal walking is beyond what you should expect. The damage was simply too severe. When can I try? Catherine asked. Try what? Try to stand, try to walk. Dr. Thornton sighed. I suppose you can attempt it now, though I caution you to keep your expectations low. The pain will likely be significant. I do not care about the pain, Catherine said. I need to try. James was called in from working with the horses, and he came into the house with dust on his clothes and concern in his eyes. What is it? Is something wrong? Miss Morgan wishes to attempt standing, Dr. Thornton said. I thought you might assist in catching her when she falls. Catherine saw James's jaw tighten at the doctor's casual cruelty, but he said nothing. He simply came to her side and offered his arm. Whenever you are ready. Catherine took a deep breath. The splints had been removed a week ago, replaced with tightly wrapped bandages that Ruth helped her change daily. Her legs looked strange to her, thinner than before, the muscles wasted from weeks of disuse. But they were her legs, and she needed them to work. She gripped James's arm and tried to shift her weight onto her feet. The moment she did, pain shot through her right leg like lightning, so intense that she cried out. Her left ankle buckled immediately, unable to support her weight. James caught her, pulling her back onto the chair. Easy, he murmured. You do not have to do this all at once. See, Dr. Thornton said, though he sounded more resigned than triumphant. The damage is too extensive. I am sorry, Miss Morgan, but you must accept reality. No, Catherine said through gritted teeth. Tears of pain and frustration were streaming down her face, but her voice was steady. I will try again. Catherine, James began. Again, she insisted. This time she was prepared for the pain. She bore down on James's arm and managed to get both feet flat on the floor. The agony was overwhelming, but she forced herself to stay upright for 5 full seconds before her legs gave out and James had to lower her back down. There, she gasped. I stood. That is more than you said I could do, Dr. Thornton. The doctor's expression softened slightly. You have courage, I will grant you that, but courage alone cannot heal crushed bones and torn muscles. Do not hurt yourself further trying for the impossible. After he left, Catherine sat in the kitchen with her legs throbbing and her heart racing. Ruth brought her willow bark tea for the pain and Richard squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. But it was James who pulled up a chair beside her and said, You did well today. I almost fainted from the pain, Catherine said, and I could barely stand for 5 seconds. But you stood, James said, and tomorrow maybe you will stand for 6 seconds, and the day after that 7. That is how impossible things become possible, 1 second at a time. Catherine looked at him at the absolute conviction in his face and felt that warmth in her chest again. Why do you believe in me so much? I am nobody. A woman you pulled from a wrecked stagecoach. You do not owe me anything. James was quiet for a moment, his eyes searching hers. Do you remember what you said to me when I first pulled you from the wreckage before you passed out? Catherine shook her head. I do not remember anything clearly from that day. You said, Do not let me die alone, James said softly. You were terrified and in agony, but you were fighting to stay conscious, and I promised you then that you would not die, not alone, not at all. I promised I would get you somewhere safe, and when I make a promise, I keep it. But I am safe now, Catherine said. You kept your promise. No, James said, you are not safe yet. You are trapped in a body that will not do what you need it to do. You are trapped by what that doctor says is possible. And I cannot stand by and watch you give up, not when I know you have more fight in you than that. So I am going to help you walk again, Catherine Morgan, not because I owe you, but because I believe you can do it. And because, he stopped abruptly, looking away. Because what? Catherine prompted, her heart hammering. Because I care about what happens to you, James said finally, still not meeting her eyes. More than I probably should. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Catherine felt like she could not breathe, like the entire world had narrowed down to this moment, this man, this confession. James, she whispered. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I should get back to work. Rest your legs. We will try again tomorrow. He was gone before she could respond, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts and a fragile, terrifying joy. The next day, James came to her room earlier than usual. "Get dressed," he said. "We are going to do this properly." "Do what properly?" Catherine asked, confused. "Teach you to walk again," James said. "Dr. Thornton is a competent physician, but he knows nothing about rebuilding strength. I worked with horses that had been injured. You have to start small and build up gradually, and you have to do it every single day, even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts." He carried her outside to the barn, where he had set up 2 sturdy posts with a rope strung between them at waist height. "You can hold onto this," he explained. "It will give you support while you work on getting your legs to bear weight." Catherine stared at the makeshift therapy equipment, feeling a swell of emotion. "You made this for me." "It is just some rope and posts," James said, looking embarrassed. "Nothing fancy." "It is everything," Catherine said quietly. He helped her grip the rope, then stood behind her, his hands hovering near her waist, ready to catch her if she fell. "Now try to stand." Catherine pulled herself up using the rope, and the pain came as expected, fierce and unrelenting. But this time, she had something to hold onto besides James's arm. She could distribute her weight differently, could adjust her stance. She managed to stay upright for 10 seconds before her legs started shaking too badly to continue. "Good," James said, easing her back down onto the stool he had placed behind her. "That is good, Catherine. Tomorrow we will try for 15 seconds. They followed this routine every morning and evening. James would carry her to the barn, and she would force her damaged legs to support her weight for as long as she could endure. The pain never quite went away, but Catherine learned to push through it, to focus on the small victories. 15 seconds became 30. 30 became a minute. After 2 weeks, she could stand for 5 minutes without needing to sit down. Her legs still shook and the pain was constant, but muscles that had atrophied were slowly rebuilding themselves. Ruth made her drink bone broth and eat extra portions of meat at meals, saying she needed the nourishment for healing. "You are doing wonderfully," Ruth said one evening as she helped Catherine prepare for bed. "When you first came here, I worried you would give up. But you are one of the strongest women I have ever met." "I am not strong," Catherine said. "I am just stubborn." "Sometimes those are the same thing," Ruth said with a smile. "And speaking of stubborn, that young man who carries you around seems equally determined to see you succeed." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "James has been very kind." "Kind," Ruth repeated, her eyes twinkling. "Is that what we are calling it? My dear, I have seen the way he looks at you and the way you look at him. I may be old and sick, but I am not blind." "Nothing can come of it," Catherine said, hating the despair in her own voice. "I am a cripple. I have nothing to offer him." "You have yourself," Ruth said firmly, "and you are worth far more than you seem to believe. James sees that, even if you do not. Give him some credit for knowing his own mind." Catherine wanted to believe her, but doubt was a persistent companion. She had seen the ranch hands watching James carry her, seen the looks that said they thought he was wasting his time on a woman who would never be whole. She had heard one of them, a man named Carson, tell James he was playing nursemaid instead of doing real work. James had nearly hit him before Richard intervened. She did not want to be the cause of trouble for James. She did not want to be something he felt obligated to care for out of some misplaced sense of duty or pity. But she could not deny the way her heart lifted every time she saw him, the way his presence made even the pain of her therapy sessions bearable. She was in love with him, hopelessly and completely, and she had no idea if he felt the same way or if his words in the kitchen had been merely the kindness of a good man toward someone who needed help. 3 months after the accident, Catherine took her first unaided step. It happened on an ordinary morning, with James standing at the far end of the rope structure, encouraging her to try to walk its length. She had been practicing shifting her weight from foot to foot, learning to balance again, and something in her decided she was ready to try. She let go of the rope with her right hand, reaching toward James. Her right leg moved forward, awkward and painful but functional. She gasped, nearly lost her balance but forced her left leg to follow. It was not a normal step. Her right foot dragged slightly and her left ankle could not quite flex properly, but it was a step. A real, actual step, James, she breathed. I did it, I walked. His face broke into a grin so wide and genuine that Catherine forgot about the pain, forgot about everything except the sheer joy of the moment. You did, he said. You absolutely did do it again. She took another step, and another. 4 steps total before her legs gave out and James surged forward to catch her. He was laughing, actually laughing, and Catherine found herself laughing too, dizzy with triumph. I walked, she said again, as if saying it would make it more real. I actually walked. You did, James said, and he was still holding her, his arms around her waist, his face close to hers. You proved him wrong, Catherine. You proved everyone wrong. The laughter faded as they stared at each other, and Catherine saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Heat, want. Affection. All the things she had been afraid to hope for. James, she said, and she did not know if she was asking a question or saying a prayer. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but Catherine did not want to pull away. She wanted this, wanted him, had wanted it for longer than she cared to admit. She kissed him back with all the pent-up longing and fear and hope that had been building inside her. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. I am sorry, he said. I should not have done that. You are under my protection and I took advantage. No, Catherine interrupted. You did not. I wanted you to kiss me. I have wanted it for weeks. Catherine. Her name was rough in his mouth, laden with emotion. I am just a cowboy. I do not have much to offer. But I love you. I think I have loved you since the day I pulled you from that stagecoach and you told me not to let you die alone. And watching you fight every day to walk again, seeing how strong and determined you are, it has only made me love you more. Catherine felt tears spilling down her cheeks. I love you too, she said. But I am still injured. I will always have a limp. I may never be able to walk properly. How can you want someone like me? Someone like you, James repeated incredulously. Catherine, you are the bravest, most stubborn, most incredible woman I have ever met. You could have given up 100 times, but you did not. You keep fighting. That limp you are so worried about, it is proof that you are stronger than anyone thought possible. I would be honored if you would let me stand beside you for the rest of our lives. Are you asking me to marry you? Catherine asked, barely able to believe this was happening. I am, James said. I know it is fast. I know you might need time, but I am sure of what I want, and what I want is you. If you will have me. Catherine thought of Thomas, who had wanted a perfect wife to grace his perfect home. She thought of the life she had imagined in San Francisco, safe and comfortable and ultimately empty. Then she thought of the life she could have here, on this ranch in the harsh beauty of Arizona, with a man who had carried her when she could not walk and believed in her when no one else did. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, James Bridger. He kissed her again, and this time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. This was a promise, a commitment, the beginning of something neither of them had planned but both of them desperately wanted. They were married 6 weeks later in Dusty Springs, in the small church that served the scattered ranching community. Ruth cried through the entire ceremony. Richard clapped James on the back so hard he nearly knocked him over. Catherine wore a dress that Ruth had altered from her own wedding gown, cream-colored with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, and she walked down the aisle to James. It was not a graceful walk. Her right leg dragged slightly and her left ankle was stiff, and she had to concentrate on every step. But she walked, without assistance, without James carrying her. She had insisted on it, had practiced for hours in secret to make sure she could manage it. The look on James's face when he saw her coming toward him, walking on her own, made every moment of pain and effort worthwhile. He was crying, unashamed tears streaming down his face, and when she reached him, he took her hands and whispered, "You are amazing." "I had good motivation," Catherine whispered back, and the preacher had to clear his throat twice before they stopped staring at each other and paid attention to the ceremony. They spent their wedding night in the small house that James had been building in secret for the past month, using every spare moment and calling in favors from other ranch hands. It was just 2 rooms and a porch, built on a piece of land that Richard had gifted them as a wedding present, but to Catherine, it was a palace. "I know it is not much," James said as he carried her over the threshold, reverting to old habits despite knowing she could walk now. "But it is ours. And I will spend the rest of my life making it better, making you happy." "You already make me happy," Catherine said, looping her arms around his neck. "The house is just a bonus." He set her down gently, and she explored their new home while he lit lamps and stoked the fire he had laid earlier in the small stove. There was a bed frame he had built himself, topped with a mattress and quilts that Ruth had provided. A table with 2 chairs. A rocking chair positioned near the window. "Simple, functional, perfect, James," Catherine said, turning to find him watching her with an expression of mingled love and nervousness. "Come here." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and she rose on her toes, ignoring the twinge in her ankle, to kiss him. "Make me your wife," she said against his lips. "In every way." What followed was tender and sweet and occasionally awkward, as first times often are. But it was also perfect in its imperfection. 2 people who loved each other learning how to express that love physically. James was patient and gentle, constantly asking if she was all right, if her legs were hurting, if he should stop. Catherine had to finally grab his face and tell him firmly that she would let him know if something was wrong, and otherwise he should please stop treating her like she was made of glass. After that, he relaxed, and they found a rhythm together that left them both breathless and satisfied and more in love than before, if such a thing was possible. Later, as they lay tangled together in their marriage bed, Catherine traced the scar on James's jaw with her fingertip. "How did you get this?" "Bar fight in Tucson 5 years ago," James said. "Man pulled a knife, got me before I could duck. Could have been worse." "You could have been killed," Catherine said, feeling retrospective fear for a danger that had passed long before she knew him. "Could have," James agreed, "but I was not. Just like you could have died in that stagecoach wreck, but you did not. We are both here, both alive, both together. That is all that matters." Catherine nestled closer, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I was so angry when the doctor said I would never walk right again. I thought my life was over. But if the accident had not happened, I would have gone to San Francisco and married Thomas and never known what real love felt like." "I am glad you did not marry Thomas," James said, his arms tightening around her, "though I am sorry you had to suffer to end up here." "I am not," Catherine said, and she was surprised to realize she meant it. "Not anymore. Every step I took to get here, even the painful ones, led me to you. I would not change that." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, and Catherine dreamed of walking through fields of wildflowers with her hand in James's. No pain, no limp, just endless freedom and joy. The reality of married life was, of course, more complicated than dreams. Catherine's legs continued to cause her trouble. Some days were better than others, and she learned to read the weather by the ache in her right shin. On bad days, James carried her without her having to ask, reading the pain in her face. On good days, she could walk for hours, even if her gait was uneven and she tired more easily than she once had. She took over more of the cooking for the ranch, discovering she had a genuine talent for making meals that satisfied hungry cowboys. Richard paid her a small wage for the work, which went into the jar James kept on their mantel, savings for the future they were building together. At night in their little house, James taught Catherine to play the harmonica, a skill he had picked up during his years drifting. She was terrible at it, producing sounds that made them both laugh until their sides hurt. In return, she read to him from books, her voice bringing to life stories of distant lands and grand adventures. "We should travel someday," Catherine said one evening, setting down the book she had been reading. "See some of these places. Where would you want to go? James asked, stretched out on the floor with his head in her lap. Everywhere, Catherine said, running her fingers through his hair. The ocean, the mountains, cities where the buildings are so tall they block out the sky. I want to see it all. Then we will, James promised. When we have saved enough money, we will take a trip. Anywhere you want to go. Anywhere we both want to go, Catherine corrected. This is our life, James, our decisions. I do not want you just following where I lead. He smiled up at her. All right. Then I want to see the ocean too. I have never seen it. And I want to take you dancing in a fancy ballroom, show everyone how beautiful my wife is. I cannot dance, Catherine said wryly. Not with these legs. Sure you can, James said. You just dance differently than other people. That does not make it wrong. Catherine bent down to kiss him, marveling as she always did that this man was hers, that he had chosen her and continued to choose her every day. 5 months into their marriage, Catherine realized her monthly courses had not come. At first she thought it was stress or the lingering effects of her injuries. But when Ruth noticed her sudden aversion to the smell of coffee and her need to nap in the afternoons, the older woman pulled her aside with a knowing smile. How far along do you think you are? Ruth asked. Catherine stared at her. Along with what? The baby, dear. You are pregnant. The words hit Catherine like a physical blow. Pregnant. She was going to have a baby, James's baby. Terror and joy warred within her in equal measure. Are you sure? She asked faintly. As sure as I can be without a doctor's examination, Ruth said. But I have been pregnant 3 times. I know the signs. You should tell James. Catherine told him that night, blurting it out over dinner because she could not figure out how to say it gracefully. I think I am going to have a baby. James dropped his fork. It clattered against his plate, loud in the sudden silence. Then he was around the table, pulling her out of her chair, lifting her up and spinning her around despite her startled yelp. We are going to have a baby, he said, his voice full of wonder. Catherine, we are going to be parents. I am scared, Catherine admitted. What if I cannot do this? What if my legs make it too difficult? What if I am a terrible mother? James set her down carefully, his hands cupping her face. You are going to be an amazing mother. And whatever challenges come, we will face them together. You do not have to do this alone. Dr. Thornton confirmed the pregnancy 2 weeks later when he made his regular rounds to check on Ruth. He examined Catherine with his usual dour expression and finally said, You are indeed expecting. I would guess about 3 months along, which means you can expect the baby in late spring. Will the delivery be complicated because of my legs? Catherine asked, voicing the fear that had been keeping her awake at night. It is possible, Dr. Thornton admitted. Your mobility issues may make labor more difficult. However, many women with similar injuries have successfully given birth. I recommend you rest as much as possible in the coming months and avoid overexertion. After he left, Catherine sat in her kitchen and felt the weight of the future pressing down on her. She wanted this baby desperately, but she was terrified of failing, of not being strong enough. James found her there an hour later, tears streaming down her face. What did the doctor say? He asked urgently, kneeling beside her chair. He said I need to rest, that the birth might be difficult because of my legs. James, what if something goes wrong? What if I lose the baby or something happens to me and you are left alone? Nothing is going to happen, James said firmly. You are the strongest person I know, Catherine. You walked again when everyone said you could not. You will get through this too, and I will be right there with you every step of the way. The pregnancy progressed slowly, and Catherine found herself grateful for all the work she had done rebuilding her strength. Carrying the extra weight was hard on her damaged legs, and by her 6th month, she was limping more noticeably again, needing to sit down frequently. But she refused to be bedridden, insisting on still helping with cooking and lighter chores. James fussed over her constantly, which was both endearing and occasionally infuriating. He carried her everywhere again, despite her protests that she was now significantly heavier than she had been before the pregnancy. He built a cushioned chair for her in the kitchen so she could sit while working. He rubbed her swollen feet every night and brought her water before she could even ask for it. "You are going to smother me with caring," Catherine told him one evening, though she could not quite hide her smile. "Too bad," James said, his hand resting gently on her rounded belly. "You are carrying my child. I am allowed to fuss." The baby kicked then, a strong thump against James's palm, and his eyes went wide with wonder. "He kicked me," or she, Catherine said. "We do not know yet." "True," James agreed. "Either way, I already love this baby more than I thought possible." "Me too," Catherine said softly. Winter came to Arizona, which meant cold nights and occasionally frost on the ground in the mornings. Catherine's legs ached constantly in the chill, and she spent more time by the fire, knitting small garments for the baby and trying not to worry about all the things that could go wrong. Ruth was a godsend during this time, sharing advice from her own pregnancies and reassuring Catherine that what she was feeling was normal. Richard built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, which he presented to James and Catherine with gruff affection. The other ranch hands, even Carson, who had been so dismissive before, pooled their money to buy a set of cloth diapers and baby blankets. "You are part of our family," Richard said when Catherine tried to thank them. "This baby is going to be part of it too. We take care of our own." Catherine had never had a large family, had spent much of her adult life alone after her parents died. But here, in this harsh land, she had found something she had not known she was missing, a community that cared about her, not despite her injuries but inclusive of them. She was not defined by her limp or her limitations. She was Catherine Bridger, wife, cook, fighter, friend. The baby came on a warm night in April, 3 weeks earlier than Dr. Thornton had predicted. Catherine's water broke while she was washing dishes, and the first contraction hit her so hard she nearly fell. James had been outside checking on a sick horse, and she had to call for him twice before he heard her. After that, everything became a blur of pain and effort. Ruth came immediately, bringing clean linens and hot water. Richard rode for Dr. Thornton, though it would be hours before he could arrive. James held Catherine's hand and let her squeeze until his bones creaked, never once complaining. "You can do this," he told her, wiping sweat from her forehead. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do anything." "I cannot," Catherine gasped as another contraction ripped through her. "James, it hurts too much. I cannot." "Yes, you can," James said, and there was absolute conviction in his voice. "You walked again, Catherine. You proved everyone wrong. This is just one more impossible thing for you to do, and I know you will." The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. By the time Dr. Thornton arrived, Catherine was exhausted and certain she was going to die. Her legs were cramping viciously, and she could not find a comfortable position. But Ruth and the doctor helped her onto the bed, propped up with pillows, and told her it was almost time to push. "I see the head," Dr. Thornton said. "On the next contraction, I need you to push as hard as you can." Catherine bore down with everything she had, feeling like she was being torn apart, and then suddenly there was a release of pressure and the sound of a baby crying. A strong, angry cry that was the most beautiful sound Catherine had ever heard. "It is a boy," Dr. Thornton said, and then he was placing a squirming, bloody bundle on Catherine's chest. "You have a son." Catherine stared down at the tiny face, scrunched up and red, and felt love crash over her like a wave. Her son. She had a son. "James," she said, looking up at her husband. He was crying again, tears streaming down his face as he reached out to touch the baby's impossibly small hand. "He is perfect," James said hoarsely. "Catherine, he is perfect." They named him Thomas James Bridger, the first name for Catherine's father, the middle name for his own. Thomas was a hungry baby, nursing vigorously and often, and Catherine discovered that sleepless nights were a whole new kind of exhausting. But every time she looked at her son, she felt that same overwhelming love, and she knew she would do anything for him. James was a natural father, patient and gentle with their tiny son. He sang old cowboy songs to Thomas in the middle of the night when the baby would not settle. He changed diapers without complaint, even the truly horrific ones. He built a sling that allowed Catherine to carry Thomas against her chest, leaving her hands free to work, which was essential because her legs were taking longer to recover from the pregnancy than she had hoped. "Give yourself time," Ruth counseled when Catherine expressed frustration at needing James to carry her again for the first few weeks after Thomas's birth. "You grew a whole human being. Your body needs to heal." It took 3 months before Catherine felt like herself again, and even then, her legs were weaker than they had been before the pregnancy. She could walk, but not as far or as long. Her limp was more pronounced. Some days the pain was bad enough that she needed willow bark tea to function. But she had her son, and she had James, and she had a life that was rich in ways she could never have imagined back in Ohio. Thomas grew into a curious, energetic toddler with his father's dark hair and his mother's blue eyes. He learned to walk at 11 months, much to Catherine's mixed pride and terror because he immediately wanted to climb everything. James built him a small rocking horse, and Thomas spent hours riding it, making clip-clop sounds and declaring himself a cowboy. "He is going to be a handful," Ruth said one afternoon, watching Thomas chase chickens around the yard. "He already is," Catherine said, but she was smiling. When Thomas was 2, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the revelation was less shocking, though no less momentous. James was thrilled, spinning her around just like he had the first time, though more carefully now because he was aware of how tired she was. "Another baby," he said wonderingly. "Our family is growing, Catherine." The second pregnancy was harder on Catherine's body. Chasing after an active toddler while carrying extra weight put tremendous strain on her legs, and by her 5th month, she was back to needing James to carry her in the mornings. She hated the sense of going backward, of losing ground she had fought so hard to gain. "You are not losing anything," James told her when she voiced this fear. "You are growing our child. That takes strength, Catherine, more strength than walking does." Their daughter, Elizabeth Ruth Bridger, was born on a snowy January night. The labor was faster than Thomas's had been, which the doctors said was common for second births. Elizabeth emerged with a full head of red-gold hair that neither Catherine nor James could account for, until Catherine remembered that her grandmother had been a redhead. "She is beautiful," James said, holding his daughter with the same wonder he had shown when Thomas was born. "Look at her, Catherine. She is perfect." Thomas was less impressed with his new sister, mainly because she could not play with him and cried a lot. But gradually, he warmed to her, bringing her his favorite toys and patting her head with the gentle care James taught him. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier and more chaotic than before. Catherine learned to manage a household with 2 small children while dealing with her ongoing physical limitations. Some days were triumphs. Other days, she felt like a failure, especially when her legs would not cooperate and James had to do more than his share of the childcare on top of his ranch work. "You are not a failure," James told her firmly on one particularly bad day when Catherine had broken down crying because she could not pick up Elizabeth while holding Thomas's hand. "You are doing the best you can with what you have. That is all anyone can do." "But you have to do so much," Catherine said. "If I could walk normally, if I was not broken—" "You are not broken," James interrupted, cupping her face in his hands. "You are different. You have limitations. So do I, so does everyone. But you are also brave and determined and the best mother our children could ask for. Do not let a limp define your worth, Catherine. You are worth so much more than that." His words helped, though the struggle was ongoing. Catherine learned to be kinder to herself, to ask for help when she needed it, to accept that some days her body would cooperate and some days it would not. And that was all right. The children grew. Thomas started helping Richard with simple ranch tasks, learning to feed the chickens and collect eggs. Elizabeth was quieter than her brother, content to sit with Catherine and look at picture books or help with simple cooking tasks. Both children accepted their mother's limp as simply part of who she was, no more remarkable than James's scar or Ruth's gray hair. When Thomas was 6 and Elizabeth was 4, Dr. Thornton passed away in his sleep. The town mourned him, and Catherine found herself thinking about the day he had told her she would never walk right again. He had been wrong in some ways, right in others. She did walk with a limp. She did have limitations. But she had also built a full, rich life despite those things, and she wondered if the doctor had realized, before he died, that sometimes the human spirit could accomplish things medicine said were impossible. A new doctor moved to Dusty Springs, a young man from Boston named Dr. Samuel Harris. He was curious about Catherine's injuries when she brought Thomas in for a broken arm, the result of climbing too high in a tree. "May I examine your legs?" Dr. Harris asked after he had set Thomas's arm. "I have been studying traumatic injuries and their long-term effects." "Your case is quite remarkable," Catherine agreed, and Dr. Harris spent an hour examining her legs, asking questions about the original injury, the healing process, and her current symptoms. Finally, he sat back, shaking his head in amazement. "Mrs. Bridger, by all rights, you should not be walking at all. The extent of the damage, the way the bones healed, the muscle atrophy you must have experienced. The fact that you can walk, even with a limp, is extraordinary. How did you do it?" "I had help," Catherine said, smiling as she thought of James and his rope structure, his unwavering belief. "And I was too stubborn to give up." "Well, your stubbornness served you well," Dr. Harris said. "You should be proud of what you have accomplished." Catherine told James about the conversation that evening while they sat on their porch, watching their children play in the yard. "He said it was extraordinary that I could walk at all." "It is," James said. "But you know what is even more extraordinary? Everything else you have done. You built a home, raised children, learned skills you never knew you had. Walking was just the first impossible thing you did. You have been doing impossible things ever since." Catherine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. 12 years had passed since that terrible day when the stagecoach had crashed, and sometimes it felt like a lifetime ago. The frightened, broken woman she had been seemed like a stranger now. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking me in, marrying me, all of it." "Your life would have been easier if you had just left me in that wreck." James pulled back to look at her, his expression serious. "Catherine, you are the best thing that ever happened to me, you and our children. My life would not have been easier without you. It would have been empty. I love you. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die. Never doubt that." She kissed him, putting into that kiss all the love and gratitude and devotion she felt. "I love you too, more than I can ever express." The years continued to unfold. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved ranch work and had James's steady temperament. Elizabeth discovered a love of reading and would spend hours with books, reminding Catherine of herself at that age. They had one more child, a son they named Richard after the rancher who had given them so much. Richard was born when Catherine was 35, and the pregnancy and birth were difficult, leaving her bedridden for weeks afterward. "That is the last one," Dr. Harris said firmly. "Mrs. Bridger, another pregnancy could be dangerous given your age and your physical condition. You need to be careful." Catherine, exhausted and sore, readily agreed. 3 children felt complete, felt right. And she was tired, her body worn down by years of fighting against its limitations. Richard Donovan passed away when Catherine was 40, peacefully in his sleep after a long life well lived. Ruth followed him less than a year later, her weak heart finally giving out. They were buried on the ranch, side by side, and Catherine grieved them deeply. They had been more than employers or friends. They had been family. The ranch passed to a younger cousin of Richard's, a decent man who kept James on as foreman and allowed Catherine to continue cooking for the hands. Thomas started working full-time on the ranch when he turned 18, and Catherine felt the bittersweet pride of watching her son become a man. Elizabeth, at 16, announced she wanted to become a teacher. She was studying for the teaching examination, and Catherine helped her practice every evening. Richard, at 10, was still young and mischievous, a perfect blend of both his siblings' personalities. On their 20th wedding anniversary, James surprised Catherine by taking her to San Diego to see the ocean, something they had talked about for years but never managed to do. They left the children with Thomas, who was now 22 and perfectly capable of managing his younger siblings for a week. Catherine stood on the beach, feeling sand between her toes and salt spray on her face, and stared at the endless expanse of water. It was more beautiful than she had imagined, vast and powerful and humbling. "What do you think?" James asked, his arm around her waist. "I think I understand why people write poetry about it," Catherine said. "It is incredible." They spent a week in San Diego, eating fresh fish and walking along the beach. Catherine's legs ached terribly from the uneven sand, but she did not care. This was an adventure, a dream fulfilled, and she savored every moment. On their last evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink, James took her hand. "I have been thinking about when we first met, when I pulled you from that stagecoach and you were so broken and scared. And I look at you now, at everything you have accomplished, everything you are, and I am just in awe of you, Catherine. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known." Catherine squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I could not have done any of it without you. You carried me when I could not walk. You believed in me when I could not believe in myself. Everything good in my life started the day you saved me." "No," James said gently. "Everything good in my life started the day I saved you. You saved me right back, Catherine. You gave me a purpose, a family, a reason to be better than I was. We saved each other." They kissed as the sun sank into the ocean, and Catherine thought about that scared young woman who had lain in a cramped room above a general store, certain her life was over. If she could go back and tell that woman what the future held, she would say this: "You will walk again. It will hurt and it will be hard and it will never be perfect, but you will walk. And more importantly, you will love and be loved. You will have children who adore you. You will have a husband who thinks you hung the moon. You will have a life that is rich and full and beautiful in ways you cannot yet imagine. The pain will be worth it. Every single step will be worth it." But she could not go back, could only move forward, one imperfect step at a time. And that was enough. That was everything. They returned home to find that Elizabeth had passed her teaching examination with flying colors and had been offered a position at the school in Dusty Springs. Thomas was courting a young woman named Sarah, the daughter of another rancher, and looked happier than Catherine had ever seen him. Richard had built a treehouse during their absence and insisted on showing them every nail and board with great pride. Life continued in its beautiful, messy way. Thomas married Sarah, and Catherine became a grandmother at 44 when they had a daughter. Elizabeth took her teaching position and thrived, beloved by her students. Richard announced at 15 that he wanted to be a veterinarian, which meant he would need to go to college, a daunting prospect both financially and logistically. "We will make it work," James said when Catherine worried about the cost. "He has a dream." We do not stand in the way of dreams in this family. They saved and scrimped, and when Richard was 18, they sent him to a veterinary college in California. It was hard having him gone, the house feeling too quiet without his energy and laughter. But he came home for holidays and wrote long letters describing his studies, and Catherine was fiercely proud of him. Her legs got worse as she aged. By 50, she needed a cane to walk, and by 55, there were days when even the cane was not enough and she had to use a wheeled chair that Richard had sent her from California. She hated the chair at first, saw it as a defeat, a return to the helplessness she had felt after the accident. But James, now graying at the temples but still strong, helped her see it differently. "It is a tool," he said. "No different than my saddle or your cooking pot. It helps you do what you need to do. There is no shame in that." Catherine gradually accepted the chair, even appreciating it on her worst days. She could still cook, though she did it sitting down now. She could still tend her small garden, though James built raised beds so she did not have to kneel. She could still hold her grandchildren and read them stories and impart the wisdom she had gained over a lifetime of overcoming obstacles. Thomas and Sarah gave her 3 more grandchildren. Elizabeth married a fellow teacher and had twins. Richard, after finishing his schooling, returned to Arizona and opened a veterinary practice in Dusty Springs, where he treated everything from ranch horses to family dogs. He eventually married a rancher's daughter named Margaret, and they built a house near Catherine and James's, wanting to stay close to family. On Catherine's 60th birthday, her children and grandchildren threw her a party at the ranch. She sat in her wheeled chair, surrounded by the people she loved most in the world, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. James, now 62 and officially retired from ranch work though he still helped out occasionally, stood up to make a toast. 60 years ago, a woman named Catherine Morgan was born. I did not meet her until she was 22, but the day I did was the luckiest day of my life. She was told she would never walk again, that her life was effectively over, but she proved everyone wrong. She walked. She ran. She danced in her own way. She raised 3 incredible children and loved me better than I probably deserved. She showed me what real strength looks like, and it is not about physical ability. It is about refusing to give up even when everything seems impossible. Catherine, you are my hero. You always have been. Happy birthday, my love. Everyone raised their glasses, and Catherine cried happy tears as her grandchildren swarmed her with hugs and kisses. This was her legacy, she thought. Not that she had walked again, though that had been important, but that she had loved fiercely and been loved in return. That she had built a family and a life that mattered. That she had proved that limitations did not define a person's worth or potential. James and Catherine spent their remaining years in quiet contentment. They moved into a smaller house that Richard built for them, designed with Catherine's chair in mind, with wide doorways and smooth floors. They spent mornings on the porch, watching the sun rise over the desert they both loved. They spent evenings telling stories to their grandchildren, passing on the family history. Catherine never did walk without assistance again. Her legs, damaged so long ago in that stagecoach crash, never fully healed, but she did not let that stop her from living fully and joyfully. She learned to see her limp, her cane, her eventual need for a chair, not as failures but as part of her story. She was Catherine Bridger, and she had walked when everyone said she could not. That was enough. She was enough. James died at 78, his heart giving out peacefully in his sleep. Catherine woke to find him cold beside her, and the grief was crushing, absolute. He had been her partner for over 50 years, the man who had carried her both literally and figuratively through the hardest parts of her life. Without him, she felt adrift. But she had her children, and her grandchildren, and eventually her great-grandchildren. They surrounded her with love and support, and gradually the sharp edge of grief dulled to a constant ache she learned to carry. Catherine lived to be 83 years old. She spent her last years in a room in Richard's house, where Margaret cared for her with patient kindness. Her mind stayed sharp even as her body failed, and she spent hours telling stories to anyone who would listen. Stories about her parents, about the stagecoach crash, about James and his promise to carry her until she proved the doctor wrong. On a warm spring morning, with sunshine streaming through her window and her daughter Elizabeth holding her hand, Catherine Morgan Bridger closed her eyes for the last time. Her final thoughts were of James, of the day he had pulled her from the wreckage and promised she would not die alone. She had kept that promise too, building a life so full of love and connection that even now, at the very end, she was not alone. They buried her next to James in the small cemetery that overlooked the ranch where they had built their life together. The entire town of Dusty Springs turned out for the funeral, along with family members from across Arizona and California. Thomas, now a grandfather himself, gave the eulogy, his voice breaking as he described his mother's strength and determination. "My mother was told she would never walk again," Thomas said. "And the truth is, she did not walk the way other people walked. She limped. She needed help. She used canes and eventually a chair, but she walked through life with more grace and courage than anyone I have ever known. She taught us that limitations are only limits if we let them be. That love and stubbornness can accomplish impossible things. That every person has value, regardless of their physical abilities. She lived a life that mattered, and she will be remembered not for what she could not do, but for everything she did anyway." Elizabeth spoke too, through tears, about how her mother had supported her dream of becoming a teacher, how she had shown her that women could be strong and capable and worthy of pursuing their ambitions. Richard talked about his mother's determination, how she had instilled in him the belief that he could be anything he wanted to be, do anything he set his mind to. Catherine's grandchildren and great-grandchildren planted a tree over her grave, a young oak that would grow strong and sturdy, providing shade for generations to come. It seemed fitting that something living and growing should mark the place where she rested. In the years after Catherine's death, her story became something of a legend in Dusty Springs. People talked about the woman who had defied a doctor's grim prognosis, who had walked again through sheer determination and the love of a good man. Young women facing their own challenges would hear about Catherine Bridger and take courage from her example. Older folks would remember seeing her in town, the way she walked with that distinctive limp, but with her head held high, the way she never let her limitations stop her from living fully. The little house that James had built for them, where they had raised their children and built their life, was preserved by the family. It became a place where grandchildren and great-grandchildren could visit, could see the raised garden beds James had constructed, the smooth floors that had accommodated Catherine's chair. It stood as a testament to what love and determination could build, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles. And on quiet evenings, when the desert wind blew across the Arizona landscape and the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, people said you could sometimes see two figures walking hand in hand through the hills. A man and a woman moving slowly but steadily together as they had always been, as they would always be. The doctor had said she would never walk right again, and in a way he had been correct. Catherine Morgan Bridger never did walk quite right, never did move through the world the way she had before the stagecoach crash shattered her legs and changed her life forever. But she had walked. She had stood on her own 2 feet and taken step after painful step until walking became possible. She had danced at her children's weddings, even if the dance was slow and careful. She had chased her grandchildren through her garden, even if they had to slow down for her to keep up. She had lived a full, rich, beautiful life, even though the pain was her constant companion. The cowboy had carried her, just as he had promised. James Bridger had lifted her when she could not stand, had supported her when she faltered, had believed in her when she could not believe in herself. But in the end, Catherine had proved the doctor wrong not just by walking, but by refusing to let her injury define the boundaries of her life. She had proved that strength came in many forms, that courage was not the absence of fear but the determination to keep going despite it. She had proved that love could be found in the most unlikely circumstances, that family could be built even on foundations of broken bones and shattered dreams. Most importantly, she had proved that a life worth living was not measured by physical ability or the absence of pain, but by the connections we forge, the love we share, and the grace with which we face whatever challenges come our way. Catherine Morgan Bridger had walked her own path, limping but unbowed, from the moment James pulled her from that wrecked stagecoach until the moment she drew her last breath surrounded by those who loved her. And in doing so, she had left footprints that others would follow for generations to come, proof that impossible things become possible when you refuse to give up, when you have someone to believe in you, and when you believe in yourself just enough to take that first impossible step. The stagecoach crash that should have ended her story became instead its beginning, and the doctor's grim prognosis became not a life sentence, but a challenge to be met and overcome. Catherine had proven him wrong in every way that mattered, and in doing so, she had lived a life that was far richer and more meaningful than the comfortable, limited existence she had been heading toward in San Francisco. She had chosen to walk, to fight, to love, and to live. And that choice, made in a cramped room above a general store by a frightened young woman who had lost everything, had led to a legacy of love and courage that would endure long after the pain of her injuries had faded into memory. The Wild West had tested her, broken her, and ultimately remade her into something stronger than she had ever been. And James, the cowboy who had promised to carry her until she proved the doctor wrong, had kept that promise in every way possible, lifting her up not just with his arms but with his unwavering belief in her strength. Their love story was not one of perfect people or easy circumstances. It was messy and painful and difficult, full of setbacks and struggles. But it was also beautiful and true and enduring, proof that the best love stories are not about finding someone who makes life easy, but about finding someone who makes the difficult parts worth fighting through. Catherine Morgan Bridger walked again, and in walking, she taught everyone who knew her that impossible was just a word, that limitations were meant to be pushed against, and that a life lived with courage and love was worth more than any amount of physical perfection could ever be. The doctor had been wrong, not about her legs, which never did heal quite right, but about what that meant for her future. Because Catherine's future had been glorious and full and blessed beyond measure, limp and all, and in the end, that was the only verdict that mattered.